The rain came down in sheets, soaking the dirt road until it turned to a slick ribbon of mud. But still they walked, boots too thin, coats too small, and the little boy's toy wagon dragging behind with one busted wheel. Clara's fingers gripped her son's hand tightly, though her own were numb. They had been evicted just after dawn, the landlord tossing their few belongings into the yard as if sweeping crumbs off a table. No one spoke for them. No one stopped him. By noon, the roof they once called home was locked behind them, and Clara had nothing left but a tin of dry beans, a boy too young to understand, and the aching echo of her dead husband's voice in her heart. The wind stung her cheeks as they reached the edge of the scrubland, a place she'd never dared go before, but desperation had no fences. Her boy, Henry, stumbled and fell into a puddle, soaking the last clean blanket they carried. She dropped to her knees, pulled him into her arms and whispered, "It's all right. We're all right." But they weren't. Not by a mile. A mile away, a soldier on horseback named Daniel rode through the storm, with his dog trotting beside him, a large shepherd mix named Scout, nose to the wind, fur slicked from rain. Daniel had served 10 years in the cavalry and was heading west to bury his brother's ashes near the canyon where they were raised. He wasn't looking for anyone, wasn't trying to save the world. He just needed quiet. But Scout stopped suddenly, ears up, and growled low. Daniel followed the dog's gaze to a crumpled form ahead. A woman in a torn dress, soaked to the skin, clutching a small boy who looked barely conscious. He dismounted fast. "Ma'am?" he called out. No answer, just wide eyes, the kind that had seen too much and expected nothing. He crouched beside them. "You hurt?" Still nothing. Then, as he reached into his saddlebag for a canteen, Scout darted into the brush, growling and pawing. The dog returned with something in his teeth. Wet, muddy, fragile. A crumpled child's drawing. Daniel took it gently, smoothing it against his coat. It showed a man with a beard, a cabin, and a boy holding hands with someone tall. The signature at the bottom made Daniel's stomach turn. It was his brother's name, in a child's handwriting. He looked at Clara again. This wasn't random. This was something his brother never told him. Something left behind. And in that moment, everything changed. Clara sat rigid beneath the shelter of the soldier's coat, her back against a cedar stump, as Henry lay curled beside her, wrapped in the dry blanket the stranger had pulled from his saddle. She hadn't said a word since he'd given them water, not even when he handed her a strip of jerky for the boy. But her eyes stayed locked on the drawing now resting in the soldier's lap, the crumpled edges smoothed flat by the heat of his hand. Daniel hadn't asked her name. Not yet. He couldn't stop staring at the childish scrawl along the bottom corner. "For Uncle Danny, from Henry." The signature wasn't just familiar. It was devastating. His brother, Thomas, had written to him once, just once, 2 years ago, saying he'd met someone, a widow with a child. He never gave a name, never followed up, and before Daniel could respond, Thomas was gone, killed in a supply ambush near Fort Wallace, buried with strangers. Daniel cleared his throat and glanced at the quiet woman before him. "Ma'am, was your husband's name Thomas?" Her lips parted slightly, and for the first time she spoke. "Thomas Granger. He died last winter. Fever." Her voice was hoarse, dry. "You knew him?" Daniel's breath caught. "He was my brother." Her expression didn't shift at first, but her hands clenched the blanket tighter, and then she blinked as if hearing something through fog. "He told me he had no family, said it was safer that way." Daniel looked away, the rain still dripping from his hat brim. "That sounds like him. Always trying to carry the weight alone." Scout lay down between them, tail thumping once as if to anchor the silence. Clara glanced at Henry, whose eyes fluttered open at the sound of his name. "He drew that last week," she said softly. "Said he saw that man in his dreams, with a dog." Daniel didn't know what to say. Grief and disbelief fought inside him, and something deeper, more painful, a sense of failure. He hadn't just lost his brother. He'd missed the chance to protect what his brother left behind. Clara spoke again. "I don't want anything from you. We'll be on our way once the boy can walk." Daniel shook his head. "You're not going anywhere. That boy signed my name. That makes it my problem." His voice wasn't hard, but it was certain. She narrowed her eyes, cautious. "And what do you think your problem needs?" He looked at the soaked drawing again, the one he couldn't seem to let go of. "Shelter, food, and a second chance, for all of us." In the distance, thunder rolled, but for the first time in days, Clara didn't flinch. The cabin sat at the edge of a gully, half hidden by juniper and slope, forgotten by time, and untouched since the war ended. Daniel hadn't seen it in 5 years, but the moment he lifted Clara from the saddle and saw her eyes land on its crooked frame, he knew it was the right place. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a rusted stove, and a roof stitched together with patches. But it had stood through storms worse than this one. Clara held Henry tightly as they stepped inside, shivering from the ride, and Daniel knelt to stoke the cold hearth. As kindling caught and flames licked upward, warmth began to crawl across the room, chasing out the damp. Scout curled up by the door, ears twitching at every drip from the eaves. Clara placed Henry down on the cot, gently, smoothing his damp hair from his forehead. But her eyes never left Daniel. "Why are you helping us?" she asked finally. "Because I should have been there," he said without turning. "And I wasn't." He unrolled a spare blanket, the same one he and Thomas used to fight over as boys, and handed it to her. "He never told me he had a family, but he left this behind for a reason." Clara didn't respond, but her hands took the blanket, folding it carefully around her son. "He wanted us to leave Kansas, said we'd start over, but he got sick too fast. After he died, I couldn't work the land alone, and the debt came fast." Her voice held no bitterness, just tired truth. Daniel nodded slowly, poking at the fire. "Thomas always believed in starting over. He just never made it far enough." He stood, wiping soot from his palms. "But I did. And you're not going back out in that rain." Clara's gaze met his, sharp, uncertain, but no longer guarded. "What do you expect from us?" she asked. "Gratitude?" Daniel shook his head. "Number, I just don't want the last thing my brother left in this world to be broken by a banker's boot." He stepped outside into the drizzle, letting the rain cool his face. Clara remained in the doorway, watching him, Henry asleep behind her, the fire crackling low. In her hands, she still held the drawing, now dry, edges curled but intact. A child's dream sketched in innocence, and a soldier's guilt wrapped in silence. She looked at the house again. Not a home yet, not safety. But maybe, just maybe, the start of something no man could evict. And for the first time, she let the drawing sit on the windowsill, where someone might see it, where it could stay. The days passed in a hush, broken only by the crackle of firewood and the soft murmurs of a boy beginning to laugh again. Henry, once silent and curled like a wounded animal, now trailed Scout through the brush outside, mimicking the dog's gait, sometimes pretending to be a soldier himself, wooden stick in hand. Clara watched from the window, her arms wrapped around herself, unsure whether to be grateful or afraid of how quickly her son had begun to trust the stranger who brought them here. Daniel never pressed. He worked without needing thanks, patching the roof, digging a trench around the cabin to keep the spring melt from flooding the place, and leaving food by the hearth before heading out at first light with Scout to trap rabbits or check for game. When he returned, he brought not just meat, but little things: a tin cup for Henry, a scarf for Clara, a hand-carved whistle the boy refused to let go of. One morning, as the fog still hung low over the trees, Clara stepped outside while Henry and Scout played near the creek. Daniel was mending a broken fence rail, sleeves rolled, shirt damp with sweat. She stood watching him for a moment before speaking. "You don't owe us." He paused, hammer mid-air. "I know." "Then why are you doing this?" He drove the nail in, then looked up. "Because if someone had done this for me and Thomas when we were boys, maybe we wouldn't have gone to war. Maybe he'd still be alive." Clara's eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "You're not your brother." "No," he agreed. "But that boy, he looks at me like he's waiting for me to leave. I won't." She hesitated, then offered the drawing back to him, now pressed between two planks of wood, smoothed and flattened. "He drew that the night we buried Thomas. Said a man with a dog would come help us. I thought it was just a child's wish." Daniel took the drawing gently, tracing the lines again. "Maybe it was more." She tilted her head. "Do you believe in signs?" "I believe in second chances," he said, "and this feels like one." From the creek, Henry's laugh rang out, full and bright, echoing through the trees. Clara turned toward the sound, and for the first time, she smiled without sadness. Daniel noticed, but said nothing. He just picked up another rail and kept working, the wind shifting through the pines, and in its rustle the land itself seemed to whisper, "Not every storm ends in ruin. Some bring you home." It was nearly dusk when Scout began growling low by the door, his ears stiff, body tense. Daniel set down the tin plate he'd been drying and moved slowly to the window. Through the trees, beyond the clearing, a figure stood just beyond the shadows, half visible in the last of the sun's light. Clara froze where she stood, clutching Henry instinctively to her side. Daniel reached for his rifle, calm but deliberate, and opened the door just wide enough to let Scout slip out ahead. "Stay inside," he said without turning. The figure didn't move as Daniel approached, boots quiet over damp pine needles. When he got close enough, he saw the man was older, face half hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, one eye clouded white, the other sharp as glass. He carried a ledger under his arm and wore the kind of suit that hadn't seen dirt in weeks. "Looking for someone?" Daniel asked flatly. The man tilted his head. "Looking for what's mine." "A person?" "A debt," the man said. "A woman and a child who left town with nothing but someone else's name on their lips." Daniel didn't move. "She owes you?" "Her husband owed me. The land she lived on, the mule she fed, the coat on her back. When he died, the debt passed to her. That's the law." "And what about the child?" The man smiled thinly. "Collateral." Daniel's jaw clenched, but he kept his voice level. "You step onto this land, I'll treat you like you came to steal. And if I do, then Scout won't be the only one with teeth." The man's gaze flicked to the cabin beyond the trees, to the glow of firelight in the window. "You can't protect them forever." "Long enough," Daniel said. The man turned slowly and walked back into the woods, disappearing like he'd never been there. Daniel didn't relax until Scout returned to his side, tail low, teeth bared. Back inside, Clara stood with her back against the wall, eyes wide. "Who was it?" "Someone from your past," Daniel said. "Someone who still thinks he owns what he can't carry." She swallowed. "He said he'd find us. Said there's nowhere in this country a woman can hide from debt. He's wrong, Daniel said. He's counting on fear to do his work. Clara's hands shook slightly, but she reached for Henry's shoulder and drew him close. We won't run again. Daniel nodded. Then we hold the line right here. Outside, the stars crept out one by one, sharp and bright over the pines. And in the silence that followed, the fire inside seemed to burn a little hotter, as if the walls themselves had heard the vow. The next morning, Clara found the drawing pinned to the cabin door with a dull nail. It hadn't been there the night before. Henry had hung it on the windowsill just 2 days earlier, his favorite sketch now dry and smoothed between 2 pieces of wood. But now it was nailed to the wood like a warning, or a mark. Daniel stepped onto the porch just as Clara reached for it. Her fingers trembled. This was inside, she whispered. Who did this? Daniel's face darkened. He looked out toward the trees, scanning the tree line as Scout growled from the steps. It's not just a threat, he muttered. It's a message. He wants us to know he can get close. Clara crumpled the paper against her chest, her lips tight. I used to think drawings were just for dreams, but now they're being used against us. Daniel took the paper gently and opened it. He didn't make this. You did. Your son did. This is still yours. She looked away, but her breath hitched. How long until he comes back? Soon, Daniel said. Men like that don't leave a message unless they mean to follow it. He stepped off the porch, adjusting the rifle on his shoulder. Then we'll be ready. That afternoon, he began reinforcing the cabin, digging post holes for a new fence, setting wire traps at the edges of the brush, and placing slivers of glass along the inside of the window sills where no one could see. Henry stayed close to Scout, who watched every move Daniel made. Clara busied herself boiling water and sewing torn coats, but her hands moved too fast, more from nerves than need. That evening, Daniel sat on the porch, sharpening his knife, the drawing now hanging over the hearth inside. Clara stepped out quietly and sat beside him, blanket around her shoulders. You ever kill a man over land? She asked softly. Daniel didn't look up. Number, but I've killed to keep people breathing. And would you, if he comes back? Daniel turned to her slowly, meeting her eyes. He nailed a child's hope to the outside of a home. That's not just a threat, that's cruelty, and I don't let cruelty walk away. Clara nodded once. I used to pray someone would come for us. I didn't expect it to be a man carrying guilt in one hand and a shovel in the other. Daniel smiled faintly. It's not guilt anymore, it's duty. Inside, the drawing glowed softly in the firelight, still bent, still stained with old rain, but hanging exactly where it belonged. Not as a target, but as a promise. One no stranger could erase. Before dawn, Daniel was already outside, breath rising in clouds, boots crunching over brittle frost. The night had been still, too still, and Scout had spent it pacing from door to window, growling under his breath like he sensed something neither man nor boy could. Clara rose with the light, her arms wrapped tight around Henry as she peeked out through the cracked door, and froze. Daniel, she called, her voice tight. He turned, rifle ready, and followed her gaze down the slope. Tracks, boot prints, clear and heavy, leading from the woods toward the cabin, and back again. Daniel crouched beside them, brushing frost from the edges. The man had come close, maybe within 30 yards, circled the barn once, and vanished. He was watching us, Clara whispered, holding Henry close. Daniel stood slowly, jaw tight. No broken traps, no breach in the fence, just a message. Why didn't he come in? She asked. Because he wants us afraid, Daniel said, and because he doesn't know if we're armed. He's testing us. Scout barked once from the porch, then bounded off toward the eastern ridge. Daniel followed at a run, gun slung low. At the edge of the trees, where the frost clung thicker, Scout stood rigid, staring down at something tucked into the crook of a stone. A folded piece of parchment, sealed with wax. Daniel cracked it open and scanned the writing. Simple, elegant, and laced with venom. The debt always comes due. Leave the boy outside the church by Sunday, and I'll call it even. He crumpled the note in his fist. When he returned, Clara was waiting on the porch, pale but steady. Daniel handed her the letter without a word. She read it once, then again, slower, as if the meaning might change. He thinks Henry is worth a trade, she said bitterly. Like livestock. No, Daniel replied. He thinks we're still afraid, that you'll fold if it means keeping the boy alive. Clara's eyes burned. He's wrong. Daniel looked at her, not as someone to protect, but as someone who had already survived far more than most men could stomach. I'll move the boy to the crawl space tonight. He won't come through the front. He'll wait until we sleep. Clara nodded, then hesitated. Do you really think we can stop him? Daniel's voice was calm. We don't have to stop him forever. Just once. The sun rose cold and colorless, spilling light across the drawing still pinned above the hearth. Henry touched it gently, then turned to his mother and said, He's scared of the soldier, Mama. I saw it in my dream. She blinked. Who is? The man in the dark hat, he whispered. He doesn't know we're stronger now. The wind shifted just after midnight, bending the trees with a low moan that made the rafters creak. Inside the cabin, everything was still. Daniel sat in the rocker by the hearth, rifle across his lap, one hand resting on Scout's back as the dog trembled with quiet anticipation. Clara lay with Henry in the far corner beneath the floor trap door. A lantern darkened beside them, the crawl space padded with blankets. Her hand never left her son's chest. She could feel his heart beating fast, not from fear, but from something deeper. Expectation. Daniel didn't move when the first floorboard creaked. It wasn't inside. Not yet. But he heard the scuff, just outside the window, just past the line of glass he'd placed beneath the sill. Scout's ears twitched. The man stepped lightly, testing the porch. No knock, no voice, just presence. Daniel kept his breathing slow, eyes locked on the door. Then, like a whisper of the past returning to collect its due, the latch turned slowly. The door inched open. A shadow slipped inside. Tall, lean, revolver at his hip, and a long coat wet from the frost. His eyes scanned the room, but didn't see Daniel in the darkness by the fire. Not until the click of a rifle bolt snapped the silence in half. Step any closer, Daniel said low, and you'll leave with fewer bones than you walked in with. The man froze, half smiling. You're the brother, aren't you? The soldier? You know who I am, Daniel said, which means you also know I don't bluff. The man's gaze flicked toward the hearth, then to the floor as if sensing what lay beneath. That boy's not yours. He was my brother's. That makes him mine now. You've got no claim. And you've got no soul, Daniel cut in. Coming in here like a thief, waving papers instead of pistols. The man's smile vanished. He reached slowly toward his coat, only for Scout to lunge with a guttural snarl, teeth flashing as the man stumbled backward and crashed into the doorframe. Daniel fired once, not to kill, but to make sure he remembered the sound forever. The bullet sank into the wood inches from the man's shoulder. Next one lands in your leg, Daniel growled. Or your heart. Your call. The intruder backed out into the night, limping now, one arm bleeding from Scout's bite. He didn't speak again. Didn't have to. The message was clear, but so was Daniel's. He barred the door after him and sat back down, chest heaving. From the floorboards, Clara emerged. Henry clutched tight to her. "Is it over?" she asked. "No," Daniel said, "but it's begun." And behind him, the fire rose higher, casting long shadows that no longer felt like fear. Morning came slowly, with pale light seeping through the soot-streaked window panes. The cabin smelled of ash, damp wood, and something Clara hadn't felt in months. Safety. Not certainty, not peace, but the fragile hush that follows a storm. Daniel was outside splitting wood, shirt sleeves rolled, arm bound where Scout had clipped him in the night's chaos. Henry chased the dog in wide loops through the frost-hardened grass, laughing again, free in a way he hadn't been since his father's funeral. Inside, Clara sat at the table, unfolding a worn envelope from her coat pocket. It had been in there since the eviction, a letter she wrote to Thomas's brother but never mailed. She'd found the address scrawled in the back of Thomas's journal, Fort Whitaker, Daniel Granger. But after Thomas died, everything blurred. The debt collectors came, the neighbors whispered, and the mail never left her hands. She opened the letter now with trembling fingers and read her own words, penned in grief months ago. "Dear Daniel, I don't know if you even remember Thomas's handwriting, but he always spoke of you when he was scared. Said you'd understand. Henry carries your name in his dreams. If anything happens to me, please know he is kind, brave, and not yet broken. I hope you find him before the world does." Clara exhaled and folded the page once more. She didn't need to send it anymore. She'd been found. She stepped outside, where the air bit at her skin, and the sun finally warmed the tops of the pines. Daniel was stacking the last of the logs when he looked up and met her eyes. "You gonna tell me what's in that letter?" he asked gently. "I was," she said. "But it doesn't matter now. You're here." He nodded, brushing sawdust from his hands. "You don't have to stay. I mean, after last night, I wouldn't blame you if—" "I'm not leaving," she cut in. "Not unless you're asking me to." His expression softened. "I'm asking you to help me rebuild this place, make it more than wood and ghosts." "And what would you call it?" she asked. "This life?" Daniel smiled faintly, then pointed to the drawing still pinned above the hearth inside. Now singed at the edges but proud. "I think Henry already named it." Clara followed his gaze, her throat tight. In the corner of the drawing, added sometime during the night, were new lines, a cabin, 3 figures, and a dog. And just beneath it, scrawled in bright blue crayon, home. They gathered under a sky dusted with early spring light, where the last frost clung stubbornly to the grass. Clara stood in the field beside the cabin, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold, while Henry played with Scout in a circle of smooth stones Daniel had laid by hand. The fence was finished, the roof no longer leaked, and the threat that once loomed like a thunderhead had vanished down the trail, bloodied and shamed, never to return. But it wasn't fear that had left Clara. It was something heavier. Guilt, exhaustion, the feeling of being a burden. As she watched Daniel hammer the final board onto the new porch rail, she knew this was never about rescue. It was about becoming part of something again. That night, Daniel brought out a tin box from beneath the hearth. Inside were a few of Thomas's old belongings. A medal, a faded photo of 2 boys in Union blue, and a dog-eared letter Daniel had never opened. "He wrote it the night before his last supply run," he said quietly. "I couldn't bring myself to read it after the news came." Clara took the letter and read aloud as Henry leaned in close. "Danny, if this finds you, I want you to know I stopped running the moment I met her. She saved me from myself, and the boy, He's got your stubborn streak. I hope one day you find them, not out of duty, but because you need saving too. The war doesn't end with guns. Sometimes it ends when you put down your guilt and pick up a shovel." Daniel didn't speak for a long moment. Then he folded the letter gently and placed it back in the box. Clara set her hand on his. "He would have been proud of you." "He gave me more than a second chance," Daniel replied. "He gave me a reason to stay." Later, Clara tacked the drawing, now mounted on fresh pine, onto the wall above the hearth. Not hidden, not fragile, but displayed like a banner. Around it, Henry had added more sketches. A rifle leaned against a door, a dog under the table, a mother laughing. And always, always, the man with the wide shoulders and quiet eyes, who stayed when others left. As the fire crackled and the snow finally melted from the roof, Clara looked around the room. It had begun as shelter, then a refuge. Now it was a home. And as Henry curled up beside Scout near the fire, she whispered the only words that truly mattered anymore. "We're safe." Daniel nodded once. "And this time, we're not alone."